Nothing terrifies a liar more than the person who finally learns to read between their lines. Chosen one, that's exactly why they're staring at you in disbelief right now. You weren't supposed to catch them. You weren't supposed to see the cracks in the show they've been performing. But you did. And that one move flipped the entire board. Now imagine this for a moment. Chosen one, a magician on stage, pulling the same trick over and over, fooling the crowd with smoke and mirrors. Everyone claps. Everyone cheers. No one dares to question how it's done. But then you, quietly watching from the back, spot the hidden strings, the trapdoor, the sleight of hand. Suddenly, the trick isn't magic anymore. It's exposed. That's the same chill running down their spines when they look at you. You've figured it out. And here's the fact that seals it. You're not alone in seeing this pattern. Studies have shown that most people never break out of illusions because the brain is wired for comfort, not truth. Over 70% of people will accept a lie if it gives them stability, even when the inconsistencies scream otherwise. But you, chosen one, you didn't settle for comfort. You traded comfort for clarity. You questioned what others accepted. You saw what others defended. And that's why they're in awe, because you cracked what most people spend their whole lives ignoring. And thank you, chosen one, for being here. Don't forget to pay this message back by simply pressing the like and subscribe to help spread this message to more souls. It's the responsibility of all of us to spread the light. And thank you, chosen one, for being part of this mission. You are part of a force much greater than you realize. Now, let's come back to it. The truth is, they can't stop wondering how the hell you figured this out. They thought they built the perfect mask, the perfect illusion, one that would trap you forever. They believed their lies were too well polished, too protected by the crowd cheering for them. But while they were performing, you were studying. While they were busy clapping for their own illusions, you were connecting dots. They didn't know you were watching the way their words bent differently each time, how their stories never fully lined up, how the pieces never clicked, no matter how hard they pushed them together. And you didn't just stumble on the truth like some lucky accident. You earned it. You endured nights where the realization cut deep, where your chest felt heavy because every answer unraveled something you once trusted. You didn't have a guide, no one patting you on the back saying, "Yes, you're right, keep going." You walked through that confusion alone, letting the truth bleed slowly into your awareness. That's what they'll never admit. They underestimated the strength it takes to stand alone in that kind of silence. They mocked you, called you distant, even accused you of losing your mind. But you weren't lost. You were laser-focused. You were decoding a language designed to enslave you, and you did it with nothing but your own persistence. And now, they can't hide it anymore. They may never say it out loud, but they're shaken, because most people never even come close to what you've seen. Most people stop the moment it gets uncomfortable. Most people beg to be let back inside the illusion. But you leaned in. You let it unravel, thread by thread, until the whole thing collapsed. You gave up the need to be liked, to be accepted, to be normal. And in that sacrifice, you gained something far more powerful. You saw the game. You saw how guilt was used as a leash, how loyalty was turned into a weapon, how their fake kindness was just camouflage for control. That's why they're in awe. That's why they whisper your name with half fear, half curiosity, because in their world, truth-tellers aren't just rare, they're dangerous. And you didn't need magic, chosen one. You didn't need a handbook. You simply woke up, and to the ones still lost in the lie, nothing is scarier than someone who finally opens their eyes. So, chosen one, are you ready to peel this back layer by layer? Because what we're about to break down is exactly why they can't stop staring at you in disbelief, wondering how the fuck you figured it out. Drop a comment below with 777 if you've ever had people look at you sideways, shocked that you noticed what they tried to bury. That's the mark of someone who sees what others miss. And trust me, if you're still here, it means you're already carrying that rare awareness most can't handle. And here's the thing, only a true chosen one will feel the urge to stay through this entire message, because every word is a mirror reflecting what you've lived. They're in awe of you because you cracked the code, and this breakdown is going to remind you of just how powerful that really is. So take a deep breath, settle in, and let's dive into it step by step. By the time we reach the end, you'll understand why their whispers, their stares, and their envy are the clearest proof that you already won. Now, let's get started. Number 1. You tore down the idol while they were still bowing to it. Nothing exposes a coward faster than the moment their carefully built lie collapses under the weight of someone who refused to kneel. Chosen one, that's exactly what you did, and that's why their faces are twisted with shock every time they see you. They never thought you would dare to question the script. They never thought you'd challenge the illusion they worked so hard to paint as reality. To them, you were supposed to play the role they wrote for you. Obedient, blind, distracted. But instead of bowing, you stood up, ripped the mask off the performance, and left them humiliated in their own theatre. That's why they're in awe of you. That's why they whisper in private, "How the fuck did they figure this out?" Now, imagine this for a moment. Chosen one, a grand parade marching through the city streets, music blaring, banners flying, crowds cheering. At the center, a golden idol, everyone bowing to it, worshipping it, swearing it's real. But then you, standing quietly at the edge, notice the cracks. You see the gold flaking off, revealing it's nothing but cheap wood painted over. You don't clap. You don't bow, you watch, you think, and finally, with a single pull, you reveal the truth, that the idol was nothing but a prop all along. The crowd gasps, their cheers fall silent, and suddenly, the ones who paraded it so proudly now look naked, exposed, desperate. That's exactly what you did. While they were still clapping for the lie, you were the one peeling back the paint. They thought their manipulation was flawless. They wore their false kindness like a crown, their fake loyalty like armor, their deception wrapped in pretty words. They believed their masks were too perfect to ever be questioned. But you, chosen one, you caught on. And here's the brutal truth. They were never as clever as they thought. They were sloppy. They left crumbs. Tiny contradictions, patterns that didn't line up, words that changed depending on the audience. And while most people were too afraid to look closely, too eager to be entertained, you noticed. You sat in your silence, piecing it together like a puzzle no one else dared to touch. And it wasn't easy, was it? You didn't just snap awake like some movie scene where the hero suddenly gets it. No, you bled through it. You spent nights questioning your own sanity, feeling your head split in two as the truth clawed its way into your awareness. Every realization cut deep because it went against everything you'd been taught to trust. And still, you kept digging. Still, you refused to accept the illusion just because it was comfortable. That's what makes you different. That's what makes you terrifying to them. And oh, how they mocked you for it. They called you cold, distant, detached, crazy. They pointed fingers, laughed behind your back, tried to paint your silence as weakness. But what they didn't know was that your silence was not weakness. It was calculation. You weren't disconnected. You were decoding. You weren't crazy. You were careful. While they were busy performing, you were busy studying the script. While they were laughing, you were listening. And now the joke is on them, because you've unraveled the very system they thought would keep you bound forever. Think about it. How many people live their whole lives clapping for the illusion, never questioning, never daring to look behind the curtain? Most will defend the lie until their last breath, because comfort is more addictive than truth. But not you. You leaned into the discomfort. You let the unraveling happen, no matter how much it cost you. You gave up the need to be liked, the need to be accepted, the need to fit neatly into their cage. And in doing so, you saw the entire game. You saw how guilt was turned into a leash, how loyalty was twisted into a weapon, how fake kindness was nothing but camouflage for control. And here's what they hate most. You figured it out alone. No handbook, no safety net, no applause. You endured in silence, piecing together a map no one handed you. That's why they're in awe of you. Because while they still bow to the fake idol, you burned it down. While they cling to illusions, you walk in reality. And that makes you something they can never understand. Awake. Now, let's answer the question rattling in your mind. Why do they care so much? Why does it bother them that you figured it out? Because your existence is proof that their illusion isn't unbreakable. You're living evidence that their lies can be exposed, their masks can be ripped off, their power can crumble, and nothing terrifies a deceiver more than the proof that their game can be beaten. You are that proof, chosen one. Every time they look at you, it's like holding up a mirror they can't bear to face. You don't just remind them of the truth, you remind them of their failure. And now they sit in awe, trying to label what you did as luck or magic. But there was no luck here, no magic. You didn't stumble into this awareness. You bled for it, worked for it, endured for it. You earned it in private when no one was watching. That's why it's real. That's why it's unshakable. And that's why they'll never stop whispering your name, wondering how the fuck you figured it out. Because the truth is, chosen one, you didn't just figure it out. You destroyed their altar while they were still worshipping at its feet. And now all they can do is bow to the undeniable power of your awakening. Number 2. You spoke the language of energy while they were still deaf to the vibe. Energy never lies. Words can dress themselves up, faces can hide behind smiles, but the energy always betrays the truth. Chosen one, this is what separates you from the masses, and it's why they're in awe of you. They're stuck in the shallow world of appearances, clapping for performances, believing every smile, every compliment, every title. But you stopped listening to the noise and started reading the current flowing underneath. You became fluent in something most people can't even sense. That terrifies them because it means they can't trick you with surface-level acts anymore. Now imagine this for a moment. A crowded room filled with laughter, chatter, and fake smiles. Everyone is sipping drinks, nodding politely, pretending to enjoy the show. To them, it looks like connection, like friendship, like community. But to you, it feels like static in the air, like an invisible heaviness pressing on your chest. You notice the laughter doesn't match the eyes. You notice how one person's smile falters for half a second when someone else walks in. No one else catches it, but you do. That's your gift. While they're applauding the performance, you're reading the script underneath, line by line, without ever needing to see the words. Here's the truth they'll never admit. You don't need proof to know. You don't need screenshots, confessions, or evidence stacked up like a lawyer in court. You walk into a room and you feel. You look into someone's eyes and you know. You don't need to hear their lies fall apart. You can already sense the crack in their tone, the twitch in their energy, the bitterness behind the compliment. That's why they whisper, "How the fuck did they figure it out?" Because they can't imagine someone who doesn't need to wait for the mask to fall. Energy is the handwriting of the soul. It's written everywhere, whether they want it to be or not. People think they can cover their intentions with charm, with fake kindness, with status symbols, but the truth bleeds through. And you, chosen one, learned this fluency the hard way. You weren't handed this awareness. It was carved into you through survival. You trusted smiles that hid daggers. You leaned on people who secretly envied you. You believed words that were hollow at the core, and every betrayal sharpened your senses until you could no longer ignore what you felt. Let me ask you this. How many times did you sense something was wrong, but you doubted yourself? How many times did you push away that gut feeling because you thought, maybe I'm overthinking, and then later, the truth came crashing down, proving you right all along? That's the moment you stopped second-guessing yourself. That's the moment you realized your intuition wasn't paranoia, it was protection. That's the day you became fluent in the only language that never lies, energy. People may fake their words, but they can't fake their frequency. They can throw you a compliment dipped in venom. They can laugh with you while secretly resenting you. They can praise you to your face and plot against you in private. But no matter how well they act, you feel the undertone. It's like listening to music where the melody is sweet, but the bass line is sinister. You don't have to see it, you just know it's there. Now imagine this, chosen one, a poker table in Vegas, lights bright, cards shuffled, chips stacked. Everyone at the table is bluffing, hiding their hands, playing their game. The crowd sees only confidence and control. But you don't need to see the cards. You can feel who's nervous, whose hands are sweating, whose heartbeat quickens when the stakes rise. You can't be fooled by the smile, because you're tuned into something deeper. That's why you always win. Not because you cheat, but because you can't be cheated. This is what drives them insane about you. They're used to dealing with people who react to appearances, who can be manipulated with flattery, who demand proof before they ever dare to leave. But you don't need to argue. You don't beg for explanations. You don't chase after clarity. You simply read the energy, step back, and let their own mask slip off. And the silence that follows burns them worse than any confrontation, because now they're left exposed, stripped of their performance, wondering how you saw it all without a single word being said. Your intuition is a sword, silent, sharp, and devastating. You wield it without even trying. That's why they call you too sensitive, too much, or too difficult. Those labels are their defense mechanism. It's their way of saying you see too much. Stop reading what I'm trying to hide. But chosen one, that sensitivity they mock is the very thing that keeps you untouchable. It's the reason you can no longer be trapped in their games. And here's the wildest part. You never needed them to confess. You never needed the smoking gun. You could feel who was for you and who was against you. You could feel who wanted to drink from your peace while refusing to take responsibility for the chaos they brought. And once you feel it, you can't unfeel it. That's what terrifies them, because it means the show is over. They can't trick you with smiles. They can't pacify you with pretty words. They can't blind you with status or image. You've tuned into a frequency that can't be faked. Now, let me answer the question that lingers in your mind. Why does this ability unsettle them so much? Because it strips them of power. Deceivers thrive on masks, on illusions, on convincing others of something that isn't real. But when you sense the truth before they can even finish their performance, their weapon is useless. You take away their greatest tool, the ability to fool you. And that, chosen one, makes you dangerous. Awareness is the death of manipulation. And your awareness has grown into something most people will never reach. They see the world in 2 dimensions. You feel it in 5. They play games on the surface. You move with an inner compass that can't be bribed, can't be bought, can't be fooled. That's why they're in awe of you. That's why they stare with suspicion, whisper with envy, and retreat with fear. Now imagine this, a masquerade ball, chandeliers glowing, masks glittering, music echoing. Everyone dances gracefully, faces hidden, lies disguised as beauty. To the crowd, it looks enchanting. But you, chosen one, see the tremor in someone's hand as they tighten their mask. You see the hesitation in their step when the music changes. You see the truth underneath the glitter. And with one glance, one shift of your energy, you strip the mask away. Suddenly, the ball is no longer magical. It's grotesque, and the dancers know you've seen them naked in their lies. That's the fear you bring to the room. And here's the closing truth. You're not operating on logic alone anymore. You've tapped into a higher form of intelligence, a survival instinct fused with intuition, sharpened by betrayal, polished by pain. Once you access that, no one can fool you. No mask can stand. No fake performance can last. You don't need evidence. You don't need confessions. You simply know. And when you know, chosen one, the entire game collapses. That's why they're in awe of you. That's why they can't stop asking how the fuck you figured it out. Because they're still speaking in empty words while you're fluent in energy. And that's a language they will never master. Number 3. You shattered the chains of inherited control without a map. Tradition becomes a prison the moment it demands your silence instead of your freedom. Chosen one, that's the truth you lived through, and that's why they're in awe of you now. You weren't just battling individuals. You were battling systems, scripts and chains passed down for generations. Before you could even form words, you were being programmed. The lessons were subtle but suffocating. Who to trust, when to stay quiet, what to believe, and how small you had to make yourself just to survive. They didn't always spell it out, but they enforced it with guilt, fear, shame, and punishment. You were being molded into obedience before you even had a chance to choose who you wanted to be. But here's the gut punch. They never thought you'd question it. Most people don't. Most people inherit dysfunction and call it culture. They mistake trauma for tradition and pain for wisdom. They repeat the cycle. Raising children in the same cage, they swore they'd escape, all while calling it family values. But you became the glitch in the system. The moment you started asking questions, you broke the unspoken law. Because in environments ruled by control, curiosity is rebellion, and rebellion is unforgivable. Now imagine this. A child grows up in a theater where every actor repeats the same play generation after generation. The lines are memorized, the roles never change, and the script is sacred. Nobody dares to improvise. But one day you step on stage and forget your line on purpose. You pause, you look at the audience, you ask, why are we repeating this play when it doesn't make sense? Suddenly, the illusion cracks. The actors panic. The audience shifts uncomfortably. That's what you did. You stopped reciting their script and started writing your own. You began noticing the double standards. Love that was supposed to heal became leverage. Betrayals were brushed under the rug. Silence demanded in the name of peace. Emotional manipulation was dressed up as protection, and loyalty was demanded most by the ones causing the most harm. You saw through it all, and without a manual, without a mentor, without a single guide to show you the way, you started cutting the threads. That's what shocks them. No blueprint, no step-by-step instructions, and still you broke free. And let's be clear, that wasn't easy. You had nights where the weight of it all split your mind in two. You had moments of deep isolation where you wondered if you were crazy for even questioning it, but you kept going. You reprogrammed your own mind in silence. You stopped responding to guilt trips. You stopped letting gaslighting distort your reality. You stopped second-guessing what you knew deep down was true. You taught yourself how to think outside the cage they locked you in. Freedom begins the moment you dare to call a lie by its name, and you did exactly that. You broke curses disguised as customs. You dismantled illusions passed off as wisdom. You shattered mental cages, that entire bloodlines, before you never questioned. That's not regular. That's not common. That's not easy. That's extraordinary. And that's why they look at you now with disbelief, muttering under their breath, "How the fuck did they figure it out?" The truth is, chosen one, you figured it out because you had no choice. It was either lose yourself in their recycled chaos or save yourself by stepping outside it. You chose freedom, even when it cost you comfort. You chose clarity, even when it meant isolation. You chose truth, even when it made you the enemy of those who benefited from your silence. And that's why they can't stand in your presence anymore. Because your very existence is proof that their prison isn't unbreakable. They're still trapped in what you escaped. They still defend the lies you exposed. They still cling to the play you stopped performing. And deep down, they know the truth. They didn't beat you. They didn't break you. And they didn't blind you. You freed yourself. And you did it without losing your soul. That's why they're in awe. That's why they whisper. That's why they can't stop watching you. Number 4. You didn't just wake up. You pulled truth from the bones of your memory. Wisdom isn't learned, it's remembered, and that's why it can't be stolen. Chosen one, this is what rattles them to their core. They keep telling themselves, you must have read a book, followed a trend, or copied someone else's ideas. They can't wrap their heads around the fact that what flows out of you can't be Googled, copied, or rehearsed. You didn't just wake up one day like it was some accident. You remembered. You reconnected with a truth that was already buried deep inside you, waiting for the right moment to rise. Now imagine this for a moment. A child who loses their memory wanders for years, confused, watching others for clues about who they are. But then one day, they stumble upon an old photograph of themselves, and suddenly everything makes sense. The features, the eyes, the resemblance. That's what happened to you. You didn't find something new. You rediscovered yourself. That's why your knowing feels so natural, so sharp. It's not new information, it's old memory resurfacing. And let's crush the lie here. This wasn't some trend, some phase, like people whispered. While others chase answers through trial and error, you pulled solutions from somewhere deeper. You didn't always know how to explain it, but you just knew. And that scared them, because how do you argue with someone who can't even explain their gift, yet is always right? Pain is the password that unlocks memory, and chosen one, that's exactly how your awakening sharpened. Betrayal became a library. Isolation became a classroom. Every wound tore away layers of illusion until only the raw truth was left. They thought trauma would destroy you, but it didn't. It revealed you. It triggered what was sleeping inside of you all along. That's why your discernment is so precise. That's why you flinch at the smallest shift in someone's energy. That's why you recognize the pattern before it even plays out. It's not paranoia. It's memory. You've seen this before, lived this before, fought these battles in different faces and different times. They think you're reacting too quickly, too sharply, but you're not guessing. You're remembering. Now here's the fact. People are in awe because you move like someone with inside information. You speak like you've lived 10 lives, and your decisions, though confusing to the average person, always land on the mark. They can't imitate you because they don't carry what you carry. You don't get this wisdom from books or podcasts. It's coded into your very being. It's in your DNA, something they can't touch, can't study, can't fake. And maybe you've asked yourself, why does this unsettle people so much? It's because remembering makes you unshakable. Someone who studies can forget. Someone who copies can be exposed, but someone who remembers, they can't be fooled, because they're simply reclaiming what's already theirs. That's why your presence alone shifts the room. That's why people fidget, avoid eye contact, or label you arrogant when you've barely said a word. The world fears most the person who remembers who they are. And that's you, chosen one. You're not arrogant. You're not delusional. You're not doing too much. You just remembered who the hell you are. And now nothing will ever be the same. Number 5. You wore the mask of silence while memorizing their entire script. Never mistake my silence for weakness. Sometimes silence is the sound of strategy loading. Chosen one, that's the part they can't stand. They thought you were clueless, that you were the harmless one in the room, that you were too soft to notice what was happening. But while they were busy underestimating you, you were busy writing down every single move in their playbook. You weren't quiet because you were scared. You were quiet because you were studying. Now imagine this for a moment. A hunter sets a trap in the woods, certain their prey will stumble into it. They wait, smug, convinced of their victory, but instead of stepping into the trap, the prey sits back, watches, and memorizes exactly how it was built. Every knot, every wire, every trigger. Then, when the time is right, the prey doesn't just escape, it disarms the trap completely, leaving the hunter furious and exposed. That was you. You played along just long enough to learn everything they thought was hidden. You knew from the start that something was off. The smiles didn't match the intentions, the words didn't match the energy, but you didn't rush in emotionally. You didn't confront them every time you caught a slip. You let them think they were clever. You let them feel superior. And in doing so, they exposed themselves in real time. Every fake apology, every contradiction, every manipulative trick, they handed you their entire blueprint without even realizing it. Here's the fact that stings them most. Patience is power. They mistook your stillness for stupidity, but in reality, you were 5 steps ahead. You watched how they switched tones depending on the audience. You studied how they used charm to disarm, guilt to manipulate, and silence to control. You didn't just hear their words, you dissected their tactics. And when the moment came, you didn't need to scream. You didn't need revenge. You moved, sharp, clean, decisive. That's what has them sick right now. They can't undo it. Let me answer the question lingering in your mind. Why does this bother them so much? Because they realized too late that while they were trying to control your story, you were writing your own ending. They thought they were feeding you confusion, but they were feeding you data. They thought they were breaking you down, but they were giving you the keys to their entire operation. Underestimation is the sharpest blade. You turned it against them. And now, chosen one, they finally see the truth. You were never the fool in the room. You were the observer they should have never played with. Number 6. You sat in the fire while they hid from the smoke. Pain is a professor. Ignore it, and you stay ignorant. Listen to it, and you graduate with power. Chosen one, that's what separates you. While everyone else was running from their wounds, you sat still. You didn't cover the cracks with busyness, addictions, gossip, or fake smiles. You didn't slap a mask over the ache and call it strength. You leaned into the sting. You listened to what the hurt was trying to tell you. And that choice, the one they mocked, the one they couldn't understand, changed everything. Now imagine this for a moment. A house catches fire. Everyone rushes out screaming, desperate to escape. But you stood in the flames, not because you wanted to burn, but because you knew the fire would reveal what was real. The plastic melted, the decorations turned to ash, but the steel, the solid core, remained. That's what happened to you. You let the pain strip everything false, and what was left was unshakable truth. Most people spend their lives dodging pain. They bury it under distractions, convince themselves silence is peace, and worship a version of themselves that never challenges anything. But you got quiet enough to ask the hard questions. Why am I carrying this weight that doesn't even belong to me? Why do I keep attracting the same wounds, dressed in different faces? Why do I silence myself to keep others comfortable? And when you sat still long enough, the answers cut through the illusions. Masks slipped, patterns glared back at you. The truth hit hard, but it also set you free. Silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's just a padded cage. You learned that. You realized the you they loved was the version who didn't push back, didn't ask questions, didn't disturb the fake harmony. And that version was starving you, so you confronted it. You stopped blaming everyone else. You stopped waiting for external fixes. You turned inward with brutal honesty. That's where your wisdom was hiding, not in the denial, but in the wound itself. And now people stare at you confused. They wonder how you became so clear, so calm, so untouchable. They can't fathom how you hold so much wisdom without drowning in bitterness. But that's because they never stayed in the fire long enough to let it burn them clean. They avoided the pain, so they stayed weak. You embraced the pain, so you became strong. Fire doesn't just destroy, it purifies. And chosen one, you're living proof. You didn't run from the wound. You became the flame. Number 7. You wore their villain mask and turned it into armor. Better to be the villain in their story than the prisoner in their script. Chosen one, that's the shift that broke their grip on you. For so long, they expected you to stay chained to their approval. They thought you'd keep apologizing for things you didn't do, keep explaining yourself to people who had no interest in understanding you, keep trying to win the hearts of those who already decided you were the problem. But then, something inside you snapped. Not in bitterness, but in liberation. You stopped playing their game, and that's what shook them to their core. Now imagine this for a moment. A painter splashes your face on a canvas, twisting the colors, distorting the features, making you look like a monster. They hold it up proudly, saying, "See, this is who they are." And for years you tried to repaint it, to convince the crowd that the picture wasn't accurate. But eventually you realized the truth. No matter how much you corrected the strokes, they'd keep smearing. So you put the brush down and walked away. Let them keep their ugly painting. It doesn't define you. That was your freedom. Here's the gut punch. They wanted you desperate for redemption, stuck in shame, constantly defending yourself. But when you stopped fighting their narrative and let them believe whatever lies helped them sleep at night, the power snapped back into your hands. You stopped begging to be seen clearly and started focusing on healing. You stopped trying to control the narrative and started controlling your peace. And nothing terrifies a manipulator more than someone who no longer needs to be understood. Detachment is the ultimate rebellion. That's what you embodied. You stopped spiraling into self-doubt and embraced the label. Misfit, fine, difficult, Okay. Threat. Absolutely. You wore those names like armor because you knew the truth. Their story was never yours to live inside, and if being the villain in their book meant being the hero in your own life, so be it. That's the part they can't reconcile. They needed you to stay broken, so their version of events made sense. They needed you to keep fighting for acceptance, so they could keep dangling approval over your head. But you refused. You built your own space, your own narrative, your own peace. And now you glow in the freedom they swore you'd never find. They look at you now, thriving, unbothered, untouchable, and it makes their story crumble, because the villain they painted doesn't match the warrior you became, and that, chosen one, is the sweetest revenge of all. Number 8. You exposed the pattern they tried to sell as personality. Call a cage by any other name, and it's still a cage. Chosen one, that's exactly what you did. You stopped letting them disguise manipulation as personality. For a while their act worked. Their charm was convincing. Their cruelty came dressed in humor. Their gaslighting was camouflaged as concern. People clapped for it, defended it, even romanticized it. That's just how they are, they'd say. Don't take it personally. But you saw what everyone else refused to see. It wasn't personality, it was strategy. Now imagine this. A snake slithers into a garden, painted in bright colors. The birds chirp in admiration, the insects scatter, and the children clap, calling it beautiful. But you notice the way it coils, the way its tongue flicks, the way it moves with intention. You don't call it decoration, you call it what it is, a predator. That's exactly how you broke their illusion. They thought their charisma was enough to fool you forever. The charming narcissist used jokes to cut you down, then shrugged it off as humor. The passive-aggressive relative slipped daggers into sentences wrapped in sugar, then called it just being real. The fake spiritual leader cloaked shame in mystical language, presenting control as wisdom. But you weren't fooled. You traced the repetition, the hidden motives, the control stitched into every interaction, and once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Once you name the spell, it loses its power. That's what happened. You stopped excusing their behavior, stopped twisting yourself into knots to accommodate dysfunction. You called it what it was: manipulation, control, abuse. Not with rage, not with chaos, but with quiet clarity. That's what terrified them most. You didn't need to expose them publicly. You exposed them internally. You saw through the smoke, and suddenly their tricks stopped working. They wanted you confused, doubting yourself, second-guessing every reaction. But the moment you connected the dots, the spell shattered. You realized their quirks weren't random at all. They were weapons. Their humor was timed to humiliate. Their kindness was transactional. Their silence was punishment. Every move had intent, and once you caught the pattern, you stepped outside of it. That's the wound they can't heal from. Not that you shouted their truth to the world, but that you became immune to their control. Their image no longer intimidates you. Their presence no longer shakes you. The game they built on secrecy collapsed the moment you called it by its real name. And now they're left scrambling, furious and confused, because the chosen one they once thought they could fool forever has become untouchable. You saw the pattern, and you broke it. Number 9, you turned isolation into the blueprint of your empire. Solitude is where empires are drafted, while the crowd mistakes your silence for defeat. Chosen one, that's the part that stings them. They laughed when you pulled back. They whispered that you'd fallen off, that you had nothing going for you, that you disappeared because you couldn't keep up. To them, your absence looked like weakness, but what they couldn't see was that your silence wasn't a breakdown. It was a construction site. You weren't crumbling. You were building. Now imagine this for a moment. A seed is buried in the dirt. To anyone watching, it looks like it's gone, swallowed by darkness, useless. They step on it, mock its disappearance, forget it's even there. But underground, that seed is splitting open, growing roots, preparing to rise. That's you, chosen one. While they joked about your distance, you were rooting yourself in silence, preparing for a resurrection they could never predict. Here's the brutal truth. Isolation hurts. The silence can be deafening. The loneliness can claw at your chest. The doubt whispers like a constant echo, but instead of running from it, you stayed. You let it strip away illusions, fake connections, and every part of you that still needed outside approval. While they were busy performing for validation, you were performing surgery on your own soul, quietly, patiently, relentlessly. Growth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in hidden places, and in those hidden places you healed. You read, reflected, cried, meditated, disconnected. You didn't broadcast your process. You didn't post about your progress. You let the unseen work do what the spotlight never could. And that's why they're in awe now, because you didn't announce your growth. You embodied it. They expected you to come back bitter, broken, desperate to explain yourself. Instead, you returned calm, grounded, untouchable. You don't force connections anymore. You don't chase closure. You don't tolerate cycles that once drained you. Your confidence is quiet now, but it shakes the room louder than any clapback ever could. What they thought was your downfall was your incubation. What they called isolation was your initiation. While they wasted time mocking your silence, you were being upgraded in it. And that's the irony. They thought you were gone, but you were only getting ready to rise higher than they could ever reach. Now they look at you, glowing, unbothered, resurrected, and they can't figure out when it happened. But you know the truth. It wasn't luck. It wasn't revenge. It was discipline. It was fire. It was follow-through. And most of all, it was you refusing to lose yourself in their noise. Number 10. You broke their chains and wore their labels like crowns. They tried to name you, but every insult they threw was really a prophecy of your power. Chosen one, this is where you flipped their entire game upside down. From the very beginning, they tried to define you before you could even define yourself. Too sensitive, they sneered, mistaking your empathy for weakness. Too intense, they muttered, because your very presence made shallow people squirm. Too quiet, because you didn't waste breath on meaningless chatter. Too weird, because your mind refused to follow the script everyone else was hypnotized by. But here's the truth. They weren't labels, they were confessions. What they called flaws were markers of your gift. What they weaponized against you were actually the traits that made you dangerous to their illusions. They called you too sensitive because you could feel what they tried so hard to bury. You read energy, body language, unspoken intentions, and that terrified those who survived by hiding. You were too intense because you asked questions that ripped the mask off the room, demanding realness in a world addicted to pretending. Too quiet because your silence denied them access. Too weird because you refused to die in the box they'd been rotting in for generations. Now imagine this. A blacksmith tries to bend steel, convinced it will break like clay. They hammer it with insults, heat it with rejection, try to twist it into their shape. But instead of shattering, the steel hardens. It sharpens. It becomes a blade. That was you. Their words didn't break you. They forged you. Every too much and not enough only carved you into someone unshakable. At first, yes, those words stung. They made you doubt yourself, shrink yourself, water yourself down to fit their fragile comfort. You bent until you nearly snapped. But then you remembered. You realized their labels weren't truth, they were fear. And the moment that hit you, you stopped apologizing. You stopped editing yourself into their shallow script. You stood in your fullness, unapologetic, unbothered. That was the turning point. Your rejection was the ingredient. Your acceptance of yourself was the fire. Once you lit that flame, everything shifted. The same people who mocked you are now watching from a distance, whispering in confusion. How did the black sheep become the blueprint? How did the misfit they dismissed rise into clarity, power, and peace? They'll never understand, because your strength didn't come from proving them wrong. It came from realizing you were never wrong to begin with. They tried to bury you under labels, but you stacked them into a throne. They tried to use words to chain you, but you melted those chains into armor. And now you stand above it all, undeniable, untouchable, unapologetically you. Number 11. You stopped bowing and crowned yourself. Authority isn't given, it's reclaimed. Chosen one, this is the truth that set you free, and it's the truth that rattles every system you broke out of. For so long, you were told exactly who to listen to, the parent who swore they knew best, the teacher who rewarded obedience but punished curiosity, the so-called leader who called your questions rebellion, who dressed control up as wisdom. From every direction, the message was the same. Power lives outside of you, and your role is to obey it. And for a while, you believed it. You silenced your voice. You doubted your instincts. You waited for permission before making your move. But here's the twist. They loved that version of you. Compliant, quiet, unsure. That was the version they could manage, the version that kept their illusion intact. Yet life kept showing you cracks. The protectors looked away when you needed them most. The voices of authority contradicted themselves. The rules that claimed to save you started to sound like chains meant to bind you. The shine wore off their titles. The sermons fell hollow. And in the silence, a terrifying but liberating truth came crashing in. No one was coming to save you. Now imagine this for a moment. A soldier on a battlefield waits for orders, convinced the general knows best. But when the smoke clears, they realize the general has abandoned them. No map, no guidance, no rescue. In that moment, the soldier makes a choice, either die waiting or lead themselves. That was you. You stopped waiting for permission. You stopped checking in with gatekeepers to see if your calling was valid. You stopped allowing fear, guilt, and tradition to override your inner knowing. And that decision shifted everything. You didn't become arrogant. You didn't become reckless. You became sovereign. You stepped into an authority that needed no audience, no mic, no platform, just the unshakable clarity of knowing who you are and who you answer to. You no longer flinched when they pulled out guilt trips, fear tactics, or status symbols. You no longer cared about their reputations or their approval. You weren't begging for a seat at their table anymore. You built your own. They can manipulate loyalty, but they can't manipulate clarity. That's what you carry now. You trust your discernment. You can smell manipulation, even when it's dressed in scripture or wrapped in fake concern. You're no longer loyal to systems. You're loyal to truth. And that truth made you untouchable. They can't drag you back into submission because you no longer look outside yourself for validation. You became the validation. You became the authority. And that's what terrifies them most, because you're not reacting anymore. You're not playing defense. You're not bending to their rules. You're standing in the power they tried to convince you never existed. You didn't just question authority, you reclaimed it. You crowned yourself, not out of ego, but out of remembrance. And that kind of liberation, that's the one thing they'll never be able to chain. And so, chosen one, here's the truth. We've walked step by step through every reason they're in awe of you, every reason they whisper, every reason they can't figure out how the fuck you did it. You didn't just survive, you rewrote the rules, and now you're untouchable. And if this message resonated, thank you, chosen one. Don't forget to like, subscribe, drop the number 77 in the comments to confirm your power, and share this with others so the light spreads wider. You are part of a force, and your rise is only just beginning.